This part will cover Ahmet Ertegun and Atlantic Records, Timeline with Marianne and Mick, Stargroves, Stones Mobile Truck, Yayas, Muscle Shoals, and Brown Sugar. Welcome to the Stones world. My last video I talked about the two-headed monsters the Rolling Stones faced. Gave some details in the Rolling Stones world. I'm now continuing on one key person. That is Ahmet Ertegun. And not many fans realize how much Ahmet had done for the music industry. It's hard to summarize Atlantic, which Ahmet was co-founder of. As a Stones fan, it's important to know about him and Atlantic prior. I prefer not to spend a long hour on this, just to give you a little hint of insight of what, why, how, when, in short. Early on, Atlantic were the label for early R&B megastars and had a who's who of jazz musicians. Ahmet, born in Istanbul, Turkey, 1923, came to the U.S. in 1935. His father was the Turkish ambassador. He did have a brother who was older by 7 years, Nasuhi. Now at 16, Ahmet was a collector and would hit up stores to buy jazz and blues records. Both Ahmet and his brother Nasuhi would build up a record collection that had 20,000 records in it, 78s. They were overlooked albums by the record-buying public. That's what they keyed on. They would go to jazz and blues shows in the 40s. The brothers were aware of the horrific human rights issues going on with the black Americans. Being from Turkey, it was easier for them to be friendly and get to know the musicians directly. They would go to shows. They would meet Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, Jelly Roll Morton. They were able to relate to them. The war was ended. His elderly father passed, and his family decided to move back to Turkey, but not the brothers. They stayed. Ahmet would continue on through college and then go to Georgetown University for graduate school in 1944. He was there for medieval philosophy, and at 23 now he needed work. His brother moved to LA and would send him money to help him out. Ahmet did have a hobby with a do-it-yourself record-cutting machine that his mother bought for him. He decided to go in this direction of music. During graduate school, he was offered jobs from family friends, turned it down though. He wanted to get into the record business. It was a temporary thing just to help him through college, and then he would go back to Turkey. While he was going through graduate school, he discovered a quality radio repair shop, selling and fixing radios and selling new and used records. The owner of the store decided to get rid of the repair shop and just keep the record, new and used, and then eventually get rid of the used. And he also put in a radio program where independent record owners could come and get their records played on the radio. Ahmet became friends with him, and this is where he learned the record business, understanding what people were buying and why. He friended Herb Abramson. Herb was going to school for dentistry, and he was also an AR guy for National Records, a New York label from 45 to 61. So in 46, Abramson left National and founded Jubilee Records. That fell apart due to the type of music they had. So Abramson and Ahmet in 47 decided to make their own label together. Gospel, jazz, blues pop by black artists. Back at that time, blues music was actually called race music. Abramson forked up $2,500 and Ahmet gets $10,000 from a loan from his family dentist. Atlantic was born September 1947 in New York City. Abramson was the president, and his wife did all the rest. Ahmet was A&R and promotion, production guy. Amit would travel to New Orleans to incorporate that sound, the boogie, which what Atlantic would become known for. Things became very tight, not quite moving along in volumes of their jazz singles, blues, spoken word, country western, children's recordings. In '48, there was a musician strike which crippled all the labels. And then TV came on. They had enough recordings to sell through this troubled year. They didn't really have anything in their catalog that the public was jumping on versus their competition like Prestige or Blue Note. In 1949, they got a break. Stick McGee. Jump Blues. This was Brownie McGee's younger brother. Styx just put out a single, a song on another label, Harlem Records. Drinking Wine, Spody Odie, a real cool boppin' tune. The label, though, it folded quickly. Amit knew brother Brownie from his earlier days and said to him, "Bring Styx into our studio. We'll lay down the song for him." So February 49th, 400,000 copies, number 2 Billboard. And this should be the consideration of the first rock and roll song, not the mid-50s. The tune gave a lot of leverage and opportunity and income, allowed them to move offices. Amit had other skills too, which helped out the artist, songwriting, and he assisted the artist with this. But Atlantic now needed to move from singles to LPs, a newer vision. Columbia and Blue Note were making 10-inch albums. The first jazz 10-inch came from Atlantic, 1950. Joe Bushkin, I Love a Piano. Atlantic would do a lot more 10 inches till 52. Sidney Bechet, Dizzy Gillespie, Sarah Vaughan. It sold well, but not the top in sales. Now in February of '53, Herb is now drafted to the Army. Still president, and in '55 comes back from Germany. But he brings back with a pregnant girlfriend, whom he marries. Herb had some issues within adjusting with the team now. They start a new subdivision that Herb is in charge of, Atco Records in '55, focusing on rock and roll, pop, and soul. He'll keep this division going for a few years till 1958, and he gets bought out. He did get the Coasters and Bobby Darin, and he sold his share of Atlantic to his first wife, Miriam, and she became vice president. Now, when Abramson was in the Army, Amit had his wheels spinning and planning, and he would contact a writer at Billboard magazine named Jerry Wexler. Wexler buys in to Atlantic and is a VP. He pays $2,063 for 13% share. Jerry was the one who conceived the phrase rhythm and blues. Remember in the 40s, black blues pop was called race music. Well, Jerry changed it. They would now become a leading R&B label. And Jerry knew how to bridge a crossover career for many of the artists. Amit and Jerry saw the vision of the 50s. They did try to sign Elvis, that they offered Colonel Parker, but they lost the bid to RCA. Gotta mention a critical, pivotal piece in Atlantic, Tom Dowd. He grew up in Manhattan, played various instruments, graduated high school at 16, and went on to City College of New York. While he was working in the evening at Columbia's physics department. After World War II, he left Columbia because his physics work was on the Manhattan Project, which was really classified, so he couldn't get his degree. He was brilliant. He was super bright and skilled in physics and registered in the Army in '43, and he was working, as I mentioned, as a special engineer on the Manhattan Project, a cell that was working on the building of the atomic bomb. He really wanted to finish college when he got out of the Army, but Columbia would not honor and decline any of his secret work to push him ahead. He then decided for a change and to go into the music business and engineering. He had been playing in bands, working part-time as a recording engineer in New York studios just to make some money. 47, 48, he was freelancing at a small studio, and that's where he met Herb Abramson. So Abramson was impressed with how his skills were, and Ahmet Ertegun and Abramson brought him in to help engineer sessions for Atlantic. He joined in 1949. He worked at Atlantic, and he designed the studios for them. He was the genius behind the many of Atlantic hits. He's one of the first engineers to build and record with an 8-track console in 58. This was revolutionary, as you can now go do backing vocals and record over mistakes. He left Atlantic in the 60s. They would convert many R&B and blues artists to become big and successful, but not in a white audience. This is around 1955. Ray Charles, Big Joe Turner, Coasters, Drifters, Chuck Willis, Ruth Brown, Clovers. Now, Brother Nisui joins them in 1956 to focus on jazz. He got to know many contacts in the industry, being he was living in California. They build up the jazz presence. Ahmet started one of the most important independent record labels in history. The respect, the visionary, and appreciation for what Ahmet has done needs to be noticed by the industry and the music fans. He knew more than almost everyone in the business. He knew what will sell or not sell. No one knew more than him about what the musical flavor was going to be in the 50s. Here's a little story of Ahmet and how great his vision was. Abramson was working with Bobby Darin. Bobby wasn't making any hits that Abramson liked, so Bobby created a song. He wrote it at Murray the K's house in 12 minutes. It was called Splish Splash. He brought it over to Abramson, and Abramson didn't like it at all. Said, "Come to me when you write a good song." So Bobby would go into the office of Ahmet and Jerry Wexler and present the song. They loved it, and the rest is history. Here's a little brief timeline. In 1958, Bobby Darin hits Splish Splash, and Mac the Knife, he wins 2 Grammys for Atlantic. '61, he marries Mika Banu, an interior designer. '65, he moves to pop with Sonny and Cher. '67, they would sell Atlantic to Warner Brothers. In the '60s, Atlantic had Aretha, Otis Redding, Solomon Burke, Wilson Pickett, Percy Sledge, Booker T and the MGs, Sam and Dave, King Curtis, and others. He brought in Buffalo Springfield eventually, Clapton, Cream, Rascals, Bee Gees, Zeppelin, Yes, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Blind Faith by the end of the 60s. Now jumping way ahead, in 2006, at 83 years old, in October, he was in a coma from a head injury that occurred backstage in New York City at a Stones show. He fell. It was a celebration for former President and Hillary Clinton on his 60th birthday. He passed in 2006, December 14th. I'm going to start the timeline around December 1969 and go to 1971 for this documentary. We're going to get to hear and see the timeline up to Sticky Fingers release. Going to be including the European tour, Britain tour, and then also details about the Sticky Fingers album cover, the shoots, photographers, and the breakdown of songs. Now, December 7th, Mick and Joe Bergman, they fly to Switzerland to deposit the 69 tour money, approximately $1 million, into the Geneva Bank. This was advised by Rupert Lowenstein. On December 18th in '69, Keith is 26 years old. Mick and Marianne went to the Marlborough Street Magistrates Court. They pleaded not guilty. They claimed 173.5 grams of cannabis was planted by police. Case adjourned, continues January 26. Now, Mick and Marianne left together from the court, but they went their own way. There was a little turmoil going on. Marianne going to see her new lover, Mario Schifano, an Italian artist. Now, per Marianne, they had a cottage in Berkshire, but it shortly went sour when the icing on the cake melted when Mick and Marianne visited the Earl of Warwick. She went there and she was on Mandrex and passed out in the soup. Mick was humiliated. Mick, a few days later, discussed with Mario the situation. Not a cordial discussion. Two male egos clashing. Well, Marianne ended up back with Mick. And Mick and Marianne were basically done, as Mick had to carry her back into the bed. January 26, Mick and Marianne returned to court in London. Mick found guilty of cannabis possession. Marianne is acquitted. Now, around the fall of 1969, Mick had met Marcia Hunt, and they were building a relationship. Marcia had thought Mick was shy and awkward, which was her attraction to him. Having a baby was planned. She thought he was insecure and a child would ground him for stability. She would say they would never plan on getting married due to he gets up at 2 p.m. Now, Mick had his eye open for a estate to live in, but also to record in. And I'm not sure the exact date of when this was occurring and when he actually purchased it. He wanted a country retreat, a place with privacy and also where he could record. He was with Marianne and did have thinking that she would be involved. Not 100%, but supposedly Mick was introduced to Stargroves by an agent. He loved the location, East Woodhay, Hampshire, England. This home goes back to the Goddard family, owning it from 1565 to 1830. It was destroyed by a fire in 1840 and in 48 rebuilt again to give it the Victorian Gothic style. Mick purchases this home from Sir Henry Carden for £55,000. This Gothic mansion was a mess and a huge expense to restore. It was creepy and cold. Mick did not spend a lot of time early on, but he got his parents, then his brother Chris and his girlfriend, then his hairdresser, and Brian's old girlfriend Suki Portier to be the caretakers. Word of mouth was traveling. In fact, Glyn Johns is the one that told Pete Townsend about how good Stargroves was to record in. There were several bands that jumped on this recording opportunity: Bob Marley, Deep Purple, Iron Maiden, The Who, and Zeppelin. When Zeppelin did recording there for Physical Graffiti, we know the song, An Airplane Flying Over, while they were recording, and the engineer, Ron Newison, said to take it out, and Page says, "Nah, leave it." That was here at Stargroves. The Rolling Stones mobile unit, the truck, they would call it. It would be Ian Stewart to think up the idea to get a truck that can mimic a studio, just like Olympic Studio that they were in '68. They could record and have all control. They could go anywhere, any time of the day. Very convenient. They used a 16-track 3M tape recorder, an Ampex 8-track and 24-channel console designed by Dick Swettenham. He was the creator of Helios. They used top equipment like Helios recording, and it's customized in this truck. Dick was the one who installed the recording equipment. He was also the one that designed and built Olympic Studios. Glyn Johns would assist with the truck building. The truck can operate 328 feet, 100 meters from the power source, and the truck was air-conditioned. Now, in January and February, They would work on editing and mixing of the Live 69 tour recordings, focusing on MSG. Mick redid vocals for Stray Cat and also refined Love in Vain. Extra guitar work for Taylor and Keith. It needed some reinforcing and cleanup. Some of it was not strong enough. Street Fighting Man, Love in Vain, the leads were overdubbed, and Keith had to do some minor work on Rambler. And they would remix and overdub, again, very light overdubs and Mick re-singing, background vocals also and guitar. They would do from the MSG tapes at Olympic and Trident in London. The Stones really liked their performance in Baltimore also. Now I have to spill this out. The primary source of yayas is MSG, November 27th, 28th, 1969. It's not certain what or where, but there are small pieces of the Baltimore Civic Center in November 26th and some of the other corrections done at Olympic. Little Queenie and Honky Tonk Woman are thought of having some splicing in from Baltimore show into MSG. Sympathy may have post-tour overdubs also. I'm going to play a little sample from the Gimme Shelter movie DVD, and we'll compare it to the Get Your Yayas version, so you hear two sets.
No needin' break it. I got the chance. Oh, check us with me. She can dance.
We get to see that footage of Maley's Brothers and Gimme Shelter when Mick and Charlie, they watch the footage of Altamont while this January 70 timeframe in London. Now, going into the fall of 1970, there is a Soho screening room that they all watched the completed film of Gimme Shelter. There was an eternal discussion going on after about who Meredith Hunter wanted to shoot.
Together, isn't it?
It'll take time.
What?
8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Stabbed to death in front of the stage by a member of the Hells Angels. Nothing's confirmed on that. We were there. We didn't see it. But we did see a lot. We want to know now what.
In early February, the big discussions were with Rupert, lawyers, accountants, tax advisors, and the Stones. They were headed for France. A relocation discussion is done and it's confirmed. They must leave England for France to avoid those taxes, the UK. They need to get out in 71 for 21 months. They were also informed they do not own the publishing rights or the master recordings. It was Alan Klein that owned these. A head shaker in realization what a vicious predicament they were in from Oldham to Klein. Also early February, the M6 motorway, Birmingham. There's a photo session. It's not the Yayas cover, but photographer Michael Burkowski took shots for the band. The Maley's Brothers show this action in Gimme Shelter. As you could see it here, it was cold and dreary out. It was intended for the Yayas cover with photographer Michael Burkowski and assistants. Burkowski's photos were rejected as the tone was not there and to Mick's liking. Nothing expressive, it was dull. It's believed Alan Klein got David, or it might have been Sam Cutler. Not 100% sure who hired him. Mick brought the concept idea of the mule, the instruments, and Charlie on an open, empty road. Now the term yayas has a few connotations, meaning let it loose, having fun, or the same but in a sexual way, slang for breasts, get moving along. Now from North Carolina, blues artist Blind Boy Fuller, 1938. In New York, he recorded the song Get Your Yayas Out. So the Stones, they would borrow this suggestive expression.
For them, it wasn't just a can of baked beans, which is like, unfortunately, a lot of record companies treat everything. They get rid of it, make it and get rid of it. And we had 3 more tracks that we needed for an album, and I think we were playing in Florida. And we had to get to San Francisco to do what turned out to be Altamont. And everybody was saying, where can we do this? We won't be able to get to New York or LA from where we are. And then everybody, what about that great room that they cut all the soul stuff in? We just, what's his name? Muscle Shoals.
The sounds were in Keith's head already before he even got there. He states that he really wanted to go back there and cut some more songs. The next thing he knows, he friggin' wakes up and ends up in south of France doing Exile. Otherwise, he says, Exile would have been cut at Muscle Shoals. But politically, it wasn't possible. He just wasn't allowed in the country at that time. So we heard some from Keith and Mick about Muscle Shoals. Well, the Stones played the Palm Beach Pop Festival November 30th in that 1969 tour. They wanted to record. Why not go to Muscle Shoals, the sound studio? It started in 1969, 3614 Jackson Highway. So not wanting to go any big city, they had a mission to get there for December 2nd, 3rd, and 4th and get in the studio. Jimmy Miller was supposed to be there, but he didn't make it. House producer Jimmy Johnson stepped in. Prior to the Stones getting to Muscle Shoals, Ament was producing and working with the musician R.B. Greaves, Take a Letter Maria, and this was for Atlantic. So he was at Muscle Shoals working. So when the Stones came in, the staff was working 10 a.m. till 6 with R.B., and then with the Stones starting at 6 p.m. Muscle Shoals is known for one of the great rhythm sections, the house band, the Swampers. In that band, an original member, Jimmy Johnson. He played guitar, he was an engineer, and ended up as a producer. He helped make Muscle Shoals what it is.
Well, the first session, I was not really to do the session. I was first hired just to I knew where all the body was buried in the studio. And so I was going to assist their engineer, Jimmy Miller. And he didn't show. He didn't show up. And so about 8 hours before that, they told me, you're going to do it. And I said, oh, I was the only one in the control room. But kind of the reason they were here was Keith. He always wanted to come here. He thought this studio, after he got here and started where he realized it was probably the best studio he'd ever been in.
The sound was in my head before I even got there. And then, of course, when that actually lives up to it and beyond, then you're in rock and roll heaven, man.
And I got into it with Jagger at one point. We got nose to nose. He was saying he was hearing a noise in this left speaker up here. And I told him when he first got here, I said, let me explain something to you guys. And I made it real clear I said, this speaker has got a noise in it, but it's not going to tape. It's not going on tape. You're just hearing it. It's like a crackle. Well, he kept bitching about it. I mean, after every song, finally at the end, I just stopped, got right in his face. I said, hey, buddy. I said, I want to tell you something. I said, I done explained to you this one. I'm going to tell you one more time. Then I went through the whole thing. Me and him were friends after that. And after that, he sent me business. He sent me artists, all kinds of good stuff. So it kind of worked out.
We also get a character, Jim Dickinson, from Memphis, a pianist, a producer, and a genius of all trades. He was not a usual hanger at Muscle Shoals crew, but he was brought in for sessions on occasion, and he did the job.
What I learned from the Stones, first you got to understand it was December 1969, and I had just made the deal with Wexler to take the Memphis-based rhythm section to Miami to work for Atlantic. And we were going to start that in January. This is December when the Stones were recording. And we were going to begin working for Atlantic in January. And the Stones, our friend Stanley Booth was on the road with the Stones working on their authorized biography. And Stanley had put together basically my deal with Atlantic, with Wexler. He and Wexler were good friends. And, okay, so Stanley sat on the road with the Stones. My wife and I had gone down to Auburn. We'd seen the tour, and we'd, met the Stones and whatever, and I thought that was it. This is as far as that's going to go. I'm, at home back in Memphis, waiting to go to Miami, phone rings in the middle of the night. It's Stanley. And he says, the Stones have got 3 days at the end of their tour. Can they want to record, because they're tight, they've been touring together, and they want to spend that time recording. If they can, could they record in Memphis? Well, see, at the time, through the American Musicians Union, a out-of-country artist could get either a touring permit or a recording permit. They couldn't get both. The Stones, of course, had a touring permit. And they had been prevented from recording during this period of time in Los Angeles. And Leon Russell was fined by the union, I think, for trying to put it together. So they were looking for a place they could record under the radar. Of course, Tennessee's a right-to-work state anyway. But Stanley says, he said, why can't they record in Memphis? And I said, safety. At the time, I really didn't think there was any studio where they could have recorded without somebody knowing who they were and what they were doing. And Stax had just turned down the Beatles, which was an insurance problem, as I understand it. So Stanley said, well, where could they record? And automatically, I said Muscle Shoals. I said, nobody will even know who they are. And in fact, nobody did. They stayed at the Holiday Inn. And Stanley, he gets mad on the phone. He says, well, I don't know any of those rednecks down there. He says, I can't put that together. What should I do? I said, call Wexler, because Atlantic, of course, was working in Muscle Shoals exclusively at that point. So then I don't hear anything from Stanley for a while. Then again, the phone rings in the middle of the night. And he says, be in Muscle Shoals on Thursday. The Stones are going to record. So I sneak down there in my wife's car so nobody will recognize me. And I pull up in the parking lot at the old Muscle Shoals sound studio out on the highway. I like to say it was in a coffin factory. David Hood corrects me and says it was really only the warehouse where they stored the coffins. But it is across the street from the old graveyard, a small little building. And I pull up in the parking lot, and there's nobody there. And I go, wow, this is weird. And I go to the back door and I knock on the door. And Jimmy Johnson cracks the door about this far, and he says, Dickinson, what the hell do you want? And I said, I'm here for the Rolling Stones session. He says, oh man, does everybody in Memphis know? I said, no, nobody knows, don't worry. So I come in, but nobody's there. And Jimmy says, well, come on in, man. He says, their plane just landed at the airport. It's the biggest plane that ever landed in Muscle Shoals, and only 3 people got off. The Stones, of course, what I didn't know then was, about half of them hated each other. They wouldn't travel together, and that was part of the whole deal about the session was they don't, unless they're on tour, they don't ever play together. They were pumped up, they were hot, they wanted to record. And also, what I didn't know, what nobody knew except Wexler, was that their contract with EMI was running out, and what they really wanted was to have some material in the boot to make their deal with. So I come into the studio, and Jimmy and a couple other guys that are there, and we wait for the Stones to show up. Well, they come in, and let's see, who was it? It was Keith and Charlie and Bill and somebody else. Well, maybe it was just the 3 the first time. But Jagger didn't come in, and Little Mick didn't come in, and Ian Stewart, their road manager, they were traveling some other way. And this is the only way I got to stay is through this happening. So Keith they had just met Graham Parsons, and he had kind of introduced him to country music, or at least had gotten him into country music. So as luck would have it, through Stanley and whatever, Keith and I sat down at the piano and started doing country songs, We're just kind of jamming, and then here comes Jagger and all the rest of them. Anyway, I managed to weasel my way in to where I was, no matter what you hear, I was the only outside person there. Stanley. And Tony, their bag man, not Spanish Tony who wrote the book, but a black guy from Detroit who was carrying the dope. Nobody else. They threw all the people from Muscle Shoals out. And they recorded for 3 nights. Helmut Ertegun was starting a session the next day in the daytime, same studio, with R.B. Greaves, Take a Message, Maria. And believe me, Ahmet knew their contract was running out, because he was in Ahmet. I met Ahmet, and he didn't show up until Mick and the second wave of people came in. And then Ahmet just kind of popped up out of the woodwork. I don't know where he came from. But I met Ahmet Ertegun in the room with the Rolling Stones and was equally impressed. I mean, he was taking up as much room as Mick Jagger was, to put it that way. You could tell every hair of his beard was exactly the same length. This is a cool guy, doing business right away. So the first night, they cut You Got to Move, which they'd been doing in the live show as a duet with just acoustic guitar and Jagger. So they're doing it with the whole band. And Stanley and I are in the control room with Jimmy Johnson. They're starting to run this thing down, and it ain't working. I mean, it was terrible. Wyman wasn't playing bass. He was playing Wurlitzer piano, and it just wasn't working. And I thought, wow, this is really going to be a drag. I'm going to sit here and watch the Stones blow it, Stanley had just become romantically involved with this younger sister of a high school friend of his. It was really kind of sleazy. But he wants to go to the motel, to call this chick on the phone. And they had just had another one of the studios in Muscle Shoals had just had a drug raid, the sheriffs. And one of the things that Johnson was afraid of was that somebody from this other studio would find out that the Stones were at Muscle Shoals Sounds and, call the cops to reciprocate. So they were real paranoid about drugs at the studio. So I figured this would be a good opportunity. If he'd go with Stanley, he could talk to his girlfriend, I could smoke a joint. So we're gone maybe 45 minutes, an hour tops. And what we left was chaos, for the Stones. We come back and they're listening to the first playback and they've got it. And they had managed to turn this chaos into what was literally a classic Stones performance, in a matter of 45 minutes. We walk in, Charlie Watts got this big grin on his face, I thought, wow, maybe they're not going to blow it. So they start working on the second song, which is Brown Sugar. They don't get very far, and then they call it, for the first night. Second night, they come back to work on Brown Sugar. Keith has got the music, the whole music for the song. And, the killer riff, playing in G tuning. But no words, no title, no nothing. Jagger's got a green steno pad. Keith is like, as he plays the song, he's singing what isn't words, just guttural sounds. And Jagger's writing it down like he's translating, like he's taking dictation. And after he has enough, he kind of wanders off and scribbles away, turns over. When he gets 3 pages full of lyrics, which took him less than an hour, that was the song. And I've seen some pretty serious songwriters in my day. I've never seen anything like what Mick Jagger did. He was absorbing all of the colloquialisms and all the Southern stuff that was around him. If you think about that song, like in the first verse, he says, "Sky Dog, slave trader." Okay, what's Sky Dog? Sky Dog is the nickname that the guys in Muscle Shoals called Duane Allman because he was high all the time. And Jagger had heard it. He heard somebody say Sky Dog, and it just, My own footnote to rock and roll history comes a little later, but it's the same song. So I watched him record Brown Sugar, and Ian Stewart, their road manager, who was their piano player for years, but wouldn't grow his hair out, so they wouldn't let him, in the band, literally. You look kind of like what do you call him at the golf course? A caddy. You look kind of like an overdressed caddy. But great boogie-woogie piano player. So I watched him cut Brown Sugar, and it was brilliant. And there's that 8th note tom-tom ride on the verses, the beginning of every verse. And Charlie walked in. He didn't even have a pair of sticks. He just walked in and picked up the sticks that were there and sat down and started playing the drums. So he's doing this tom-tom ride, and it's rubbing against the bass note that's there, and the way, anybody who's been in the studio has heard that happen. So they're listening to a playback, and somebody says to Charlie, he says, "Man, your tom-tom is rubbing the bass note. Maybe you better tune it." Charlie says, "I never tuned me drums." And everybody just kind of acts like they didn't hear it. And finally, Ian Stewart says, "Wait a minute. Well, you can't say something like that. I've known you for years. You can't just say, 'I never tuned my drums.'" Charlie says, "I never tuned my drums. Why should I tune something I'm going to go out there and beat on?" He says, "I'll hit it a few times. It'll change." That's what he did, But to give you an idea of the mindset that was at work here, I did not see Keith Richards' hands in 3 days move to the tuning pegs. He simply did not tune his guitar, period. Nor did Charlie tune the drums. And every time Jimmy Johnson asked Bill Wyman to turn his bass up, he turned it down. And Jimmy told me later, says, "I was afraid I thought he was going to turn it off. I was afraid to keep saying it."
Keith says that these sessions were as vital to him as any other that he had done. He wondered what if some of Beggars or Let It Bleed, those sessions were cut there. They may have sounded a little more funkier. In 1995, Rolling Stone magazine interviewed Mick, and Mick would say he would never write the song now. It was just too raw. Some girls had its share also. The references around slavery and physical abuse around a plantation, and the fact that also Sticky was a heroin album. What was Mick's intention for Brown Sugar? Was it exploitation? Was it satire? Or just historical analysis? The messages of Brown Sugar can be tangled and mixed. Some may say, oh, it's simple enough and it's obvious. Slave trade, slave owners who raped her captive females that they bought in New Orleans off the ships. Mick says he was rehabbing his hand from an accident on the Ned Kelly set and sitting in a trailer in the Australian desert in '69.
Brown Sugar, yeah. I was sitting in a field in Australia with a pair of headphones on plugged into my electric guitar and writing this tune while I was shooting a movie. Yeah, very alone in the outback. I mean, of course, not that alone, with the 200 crew.
He had time to dig into writing. And not only that, into writing music. And Brown Sugar was his first crack at it. And there are claims Marcia Hunt is who the song is written for, but really I could only see the chorus claiming that. It's not romantic lyrics for sure. Marcia was a recipient of several love letters that Mick would send her from Australia. And when you look at the chorus of Brown Sugar, you can see the sexual engaging with her. But Bill would mention someone else, Claudia Lanier, one of Ike and Tina's Ikeettes. She was a muse of Mick's in the late '69. It's possible it's her.
We were very good friends, let me put it that way. And I also think what helped people to associate me with Brown Sugar was that Mick and I were seen around town a lot together. So people put two and two together.
Here is one of the earliest insights I know of Mick sharing his riff and some of the opening and chorus lyrics to Ike Turner backstage at MSG November '69. This is a fantastic and great watch to see Ike's reaction to hearing Brown Sugar and How Come You Taste So Good. He's enjoying that. Keep in mind that this was pre-Muscle Shoals. There's so much debate that's still going on the lyrics, where Mick used Sky Dog Slaver or did he use Scarred Old Slaver? Now Johnson and Dickinson say Sky Dog. I gotta go with Scarred, and I'll present a few things going forward here. Mick found out that Duane Allman worked there at Muscle Shoals in the sessions. As many know, his nickname was Dog, due to his playful and shaggy look, as he became more prolific. And it was Wilson Pickett's guys, when they were in the studio, that named him Sky Dog, adding the word sky as he was just way out there. So we hear Jim Dickinson, and there's also Jimmy Johnson to talk about Sky Dog, and using that instead of Scarred Old. In early versions, Mick sings Scarred, and especially at Altamont, he doesn't say Sky Dog, which was just a few days after it was recorded.
Thank you. And we're going to do one for you now, which we did for you, which we haven't played ever before. We're going to play for you for the very first time. It's called Brown Sugar. Yeah. Go, go, lady,
and Keith recites it too, as Scarred.
Gold Coast slave ship bound for cotton fields. Sold in the market down in New Orleans. Scarred old slave owners is doing alright. Hear him whip the women just around midnight.
Keith is known for saying that the publishing guy changed it and transcribed it to Scarred instead. He had no idea what Sky Dog was. Mick would declare that there were sometimes incorrect lyrics being published in officially released Stone sheet music. Now, just for the heck of it, I got back-to-back Scarred Old, sung by Mick, and then I recorded Sky Dog. You could hear the differences.
Scarred Old. Sky Dog.
There are two verses related to the slavery and plantation. Now, I'm not telling you anything new here. Just got to present it, put it out here in this documentary. First verse, the Gold Coast, that's West Africa. And sure, the slave ship had many on board. And a slaver, well, it's the middleman who buys and sells and transports slaves. The whipping women is a brutal vision that went on. There is no obvious sexual reference, but many fans will think these are metaphors for sexual abuse and rape. So take it what you want, whipping or sexual rape. The drums beating, it's a slave drumming, African drums, war drums, conquering drums. Old English blood runs hot. Contrast of a proper Englishman getting lathered up for his sexual desires. The Englishman's lady is fed up with his sexual antics now, while she also does have the houseboy, also known as a servant, for her sexual desire. Someone is screaming around midnight. Simple, my interpretation, your interpretation. Let me know if you think differently. With the third verse being totally off the slavery topic. More sexuality as a woman having pleasures with young boys. Sweet 16. Then the narrator, protagonist, claims he's older than those boys, and he has his pleasures also. So the chorus, sexual engaging, and the narrator enjoys it. And with the song title originally called Black Kitty, you fill in the word kitty and figure that one out. It's a man and woman encountering. He does reference a young girl, so who knows what age. Marsha was 23, Claudia was 23. Then there's the brown sugar. Heroin. Slang reference. The song being drug-related. Cooked brown heroin. So many thoughts and ideas. And as we know now, this song hit Mick hard lyrically. And he understood the meaning from his perspective, and he didn't like it. Throwing this in here, and thanks to Martin Elliott with his book, great book, The Rolling Stones Complete Recording Sessions. He talks about and pointed out that Sam and Dave recorded in 1968 a song called Soul Sister, Brown Sugar. And in April of 69 it was released. On Atlantic, you can see the lyrics and how it's outright obvious their intention. Keep on socking it to me, baby, all night long. The song, a great Stax funk and soul. The term brown sugar here is taken as a compliment for an African-American woman. Mick would also add, God knows what's on about that song. It's such a mishmash. All the nasty subjects in one go. Slavery, dope, sex, you name it. Keeping in mind, bluesmen would use food as a sexual metaphor, like sugar, lemon, peaches, jelly, honey. Mick on vocals, maracas and castanets, Keith lead and rhythm guitar and acoustic and background vocals, Mick Taylor lead and rhythm guitar, Bill on bass, Charlie and Ian piano, and Bobby. Jimmy Miller Jimmy Johnson, Andy Johns, Glyn Johns, assistant by Chris Kimsey, Keith Hardwood, and Larry Hamby. I'm breaking in now with a little something different. Present a background song, an outtake called Travelin' Man. Now in March to May in London Olympic Studios and also Stargroves, a mix house with the mobile recording unit, using Jimmy, Glyn, Andy, Chris Kimsey, and I believe Keith Harwood. They worked on a song called Traveling Tiger. It's unverified. But later on in the October time frame, at the end of the month, which is when they went to Olympic, they were in Stargroves earlier in the month, but went back to Olympic, and Travelin' Man was put together. Nicky Hopkins is playing on it. You're seeing right now Jeremy Barres, Rolling Stones guitar cover channel on YouTube, giving us an insight on Travelin' Man. Jimmy Johnson talks about what Keith used as a guitar, and he mentioned it was an SG or a Telecaster for Brown Sugar. I don't find any concrete confirmation about that. We did see him use the Dan Armstrong Plexi on top of the Pops in '71, and Taylor used on top of the Pops his ES-345, but not clear in the studio. It's probably Keith's Gibson Hummingbird used for the acoustic, though. Anybody has concrete evidence, bring it on. Bill, the Fender Mustang. Stu would add his typical piano boogie woogie. There are videos out there of interviews with Jimmy Johnson and Jim Dickinson. However, I also found some articles and interviews with Jimmy Johnson. TapeOp.com was a great source, and he gave a good explanation of some technical details, which I'm just going to lay on you. And the studio was about 25 by 55 feet. They used a Scully 280 8-track, 1 inch. Brown Sugar was 15 IPS. That means 15 inches per second of tape used. And it was all done in mono. And what Jimmy did was 1 roll of tape per session was used a day, 3 total. When he finished, he put one of them into a vault. And next day, start with a new fresh one. Now for microphones on the drums, Charlie brought in his own drum set. They used a Neumann U47 over the top. It was about nose high to Charlie. There was also a mic facing downward to the bass drum kit in front, and also a boom mic placed over the snare. That is why I'm mentioning this, because of that incredible known sound. Charlie loved the sound so much he wanted to buy the microphone, but Jimmy Johnson just said no. For his bass drum, they used a EV666 Electro Voice on a stand placed on the backside of the drum. His hi-hat was a Shure SM57. The console, they used a Universal Audio. It was tubed with those big, huge rotary knobs with 10 inputs. Now there's some discussions about the echo, the reverb, the delay, whatever you want to call it. Jimmy would say that they used the echo chamber in the console when recording. Now there's some beautiful slapback echo and delay that we hear. Now here's what the dilemma is. It's thought that an EMT plate reverb device was used for Keith's guitar. This EMT 140 was used since around 1957. This device, it sends the audio signal to a large plate that is suspended in the unit, a metal plate. Here you could see it, and it vibrates. There are pickups on the plate, and that sends the vibrations as an audio signal, and this signal's mixed in with the original signal. A lot there, and I'm sure some of you just don't even want to think about it. Now, Jimmy Johnson says in interviews they did not get this unit until a year later. Now, the mic for guitars, they were 2 to 3 inches from the grill. Taylor had a Shure SM57 on his Fender Twin. Keith, using the Fender Twin also, he had his Twin wide open, Max, using an RCA 77DX mic. Loud. Jimmy said this mic was the key. To avoid the distortion though, Jimmy used a homemade 20 decibel pad, which drops the decibel levels before it hit the console. So these tools helped Jimmy out tremendously, both the 20 dB pad and that RCA 77DX mic. The amps held up fine. The piano was mic'd up, the bass amp mic'd up with an RCA 44. Mick did overdubs for the maracas and castanets at Muscle Shoals, and he would use mono headsets. They used maybe 8 tracks. They would transfer the 3 tapes in London at the Olympic Studio. They did that so they could do more overdubs. It's thought some takes were erased in London. And Jimmy would get credit for engineering on the album, but not the studio, due to the union and the immigration laws and not having the work permits. So they did not want to get busted, which again is why everything was a hush. Jimmy said he would sneak off the rough cuts. He did this at 7.5 IPS mix. Not having the overdubs or sax, he would play it for folks. Jimmy goes on and he explains, for all 3 songs they would start with just the idea, as Mick says, a mishmash. They were trying to come up with some lick. 3 to 4 hours of noodling around, and by hour 4, everyone would now fall in place as one cohesive unit. Charlie and Bill would find their place. Then by end of hour 5, they would start singing. This is when Jimmy knew he had to really focus. No producer to tell him what to do about rolling tapes. He used his own intuition to produce, and Jimmy said Mick and Keith really produced it. So by the 5th and 6th hour, all was falling into place. This is how each day flowed. After the take, they would ask, "Is that it?" And Jimmy would say, "You need one more. You got it in you?" And it was usually by the 3rd take this magic happened, and when it would end around 1 a.m. Jimmy's co-worker, Barry Beckett, he was one of the Swampers, keyboardist in fact. He was outside of the building, and while these takes around 1 a.m. were happening, he said he could feel the building shake. And Jimmy would say he never, ever experienced this Stones formula and magic again. Never, ever like it since. The Stones had lawyers down there, Atlantic had lawyers down there, and on the 3rd day, Jerry and Emmett were there. They worked on the distribution of the Stones' new label in the U.S. for Atlantic at Florence, Alabama. Let's give a listen to 2 of these early takes.
Cold in his blood run high. Lady on the house.
Jimmy Johnson would talk about how Keith Samp was in a booth and Mick would be in a back room with baffles around him. For vocals, there was some leakage, but he was so close to the mic anyway. The drums did not have a booth, just baffles. Charlie would not play too loud anyway, still a little bit of leakage. They didn't get anywhere on the first take. Jimmy Johnson would marvel at how Mick and Keith would sing. They were together at the mic, holding a fifth of bourbon and sharing it. They sang lead and harmony there. It's tracking vocals that were laid down December 4th, the last day for all three songs. Jim Dickinson was in the studio listening to Brown Sugar. He heard the early takes and then heard the later takes with the vocals, and he and Charlie were sitting in the control booth doing one of the takes, and Mick had sung Hear 'Em Whip the Women just around midnight, and it changed in later takes. It was missing. So Dickinson told Charlie, "What's going on? Earlier on he's singing Hear 'Em Whip the Women. That's such a great line." Charlie being Charlie, he says, "Why don't you tell him?" So Jim goes over to the intercom and tells Mick, and Mick just responds, "Oh yeah, thanks." And that's the way it was. Mick Taylor lays down the guitar solo for Brown Sugar. That's what's used. Mick says Brown Sugar has the Muscle Shoals sound, distorted and funky. There are plenty outtakes for Brown Sugar. I don't know which ones are first, second, last, but I'm going to put a few out there for you just so you can get a taste. I'm sure there's many people out there who haven't heard some of this, so it's for you. It's going to be some random intros and some of the middle parts, verses, solos.
Sold in the market down in New Orleans. Scott old slave, I know it's doing alright. Hear him whip the women just around midnight.
think it's one of the first rock and roll that Mick wrote by himself basically all the way through. I showed Mick this 5-string tuning, you know, and he's great. He went back and learned it, and I was really amazed. But basically, that song was basically all Mick. I really just arranged it a little and got the sound down on it.
December 9th to the 18th, Stones would be in Olympic Studio doing some work overdubs with Brown Sugar, Wild Horses, and also You Gotta Move, and Dead Flowers. They were also rehearsing for 4 shows. 2 would be December 14th at the Seville Theater, then 2 shows at the Lyceum Theater on December 21st. Now, Bobby and Jim Price, they would be working in 1970 with George Harrison on his album All Things Must Pass. Harrison doing some work, I believe, with EMI, and eventually going to Trident Studios. And in August and September, that's where Bobby and Jim would help him out with some overdubs of brass. Now, Mick would run into Bobby and also Jim and bring them on to work on Sticky. They wanted some brass horns. So that would be done also in the June-summer time frame at Olympic. I mentioned that so I could add this to the timeline for December 1970. At Olympic, December 18th, that was Bobby and Keith's birthday party, and they had a jam session. Invited was Eric Clapton and Al Kooper to join on a jam of Brown Sugar. That version many of you heard. George Harrison was there, but he didn't participate. Eric playing the slide guitar and Bobby playing the sax solo, instead of Taylor playing his lead solo. As we hear this so-called Clapton version, it has a great intention. Vocals for Keith were great throughout. The slide and sax solo going to a quick little solo by Clapton only.
Sold in the market down in New Orleans. Scott old slave, I know it's doing all right. Hearing with the wind is just around midnight. Brown sugar, how come you taste so good? Brown sugar, just like a young girl should. Just like a young girl should.
And at the 3:10 mark, some fabulous ad-libbing from Mick. And then he also says, "Get down on your knees." And at the end, we hear, "That's it." And then someone says, "Was that good?" And that is supposedly Eric.
That's it.
Several days after the Clapton Jam, they would have Bobby come in and lay down his sax solo, replacing Taylor's leads. Vocals and overdubs were done at Olympic for Brown Sugar in April, and then also December. It was not worked on at Stargroves. I'm not going to be explaining anything new and amazing here, but just give it a flipside CT perspective. We first get that wonderful echo slapback sound in those first chords and into the single tasteful leads and the castanets. But pay attention to the first cymbal crash and then the pounding bass and then also the drums. And then at the 22-second mark, the beautiful, well-positioned, well-placed acoustic rhythm. And the bonus treat, right into the second line of the song, is Keith's backing vocal. Then in the chorus, we get that peppering, sweet little taste of Ian with the piano, which I wish there was more of. And you think you hear the saxophone, but it's not in there yet. There's this rhythm part right around 131 where Keith makes a different change of the chords and the sound. To me, is such a key part of the song. It's in the left channel, and then it goes into Bobby. Like a cat walking through the grass, nice and slow, and the castanets just wonderfully placed. And as towards the end of the song it slides into the yeahs and the whoas, and the maracas are icing on the cake here as it fades out. The cymbal crashing of Charlie is just fantastic. Maracas coming in around 207, and the acoustic is nice and clear with heavy strumming. The sax and the lead guitar sound off each other, and we get the yeahs at the end. Jimmy was not sure what this was, but thinks it was Taylor or Charlie that says yeah at the end. Now for some deconstructing sounds, just to give you an idea and flavor of the pieces.
she bound for cotton fields, sold in the market down in New Orleans. Scott old slave, I know it's doing all right. Here and with the women just around midnight. Brown sugar, how come your taste so good? I bet your mama was a 10-show queen, and all the boyfriends were sweet 16. I know school boys, but I know that life. You should have heard me just around midnight. Brown sugar, how come your taste so good, baby? Brown sugar, just like a younger judge, yeah, 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 whoa! Just like a black judge, yeah, 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 whoa! Gold Coast slave, she bound for cotton field, sold in the market down in New Orleans. Scott old slave, I know it's doing all right. Here and with the women just around midnight. Down in the bar, sugar, how come your tail so good? Down to the ground, bounce, how come your tail so good?
The great comp album from APCO, got Hot Rocks, released in '71. There were several record plants that produced this album in the US. One of those plants was in Long Island. And by accident, they were sent the wrong versions for Brown Sugar and Wild Horses. It was about 2 weeks worth of time that went by when someone realized it was the wrong songs. Now, when you look at a vinyl record and you look towards the middle, you see a label, and outside the label is a sort of a shiny black area with no grooves in it. That's called the dead wax. It is in there where the writing of Shelley is written, and then also the date 11/18/71. Combination on side 4 tells you that you would own that rare vinyl with the mistake. APCO was the one that had and owned the Muscle Shoals tapes. So the engineer for that day who's mastering the tape, the vinyl pressing, they usually inscribe their name, and that's where Shelley comes in. So go break out your Hot Rocks double album and see which one you have. These versions were intended for the Gimme Shelter documentary. And you'll know this version because it does not have the sax solo for Brown Sugar. It has Mick Taylor's leads.
And Mick, the thing is, Mick, you gotta finish this record. This record's gonna be great. It's gonna be a great record. We're gonna put all our resources behind the record. But listen, the promotion, forget the promotion. We don't want to spend money on the promotion. We just have a big fucking party and promote the shit out of the party, and that'll sell a record.
Okay, no.
This concludes part 2 of the making of Sticky Fingers. Part 1 was Rolling Stones and the Two-Headed Monster. So part 3 will be coming up, giving you more about the entire album and the songs, also outtakes, and then also details about the Sticky Fingers album cover, the shoots, photographers, and their tours. See you then.
Sound of strangers sending nothing to my mind. Just another mad day.